My signature was once worth over $200 million. Today it's only good for checking out a book from the public library. I've dined with presidents and kings, yet my loneliest meal was in a Michelin star restaurant, completely alone. You want to know how I lost an empire? It wasn't the market, it wasn't a rival. It was a single sentence I spoke to my brightest employee, a sentence born of pure arrogance. The internet, I said, is a fad. That was the beginning of the end of everything. My name is Arthur Vance and I am 65 years old. The story I'm about to tell you isn't about business strategy or stock portfolios. It's about a man who built a castle of paper and ink and then stood on its tallest tower, laughing at the incoming tide, absolutely certain it would never reach him. It all started with the smell of fresh ink on cheap newsprint. When I was 16, growing up in a part of the city that respectable people only drove through with their windows up, I wasn't dreaming of boardrooms. I was a newspaper boy. I'd wake up before the sun, my fingers numb from the cold, and haul stacks of the morning edition through rain, sleet, and snow. Most kids hated it. I loved it. I loved the weight of the paper in my hands, the almost sacred quiet of the pre-dawn streets. Each paper I slid into a mail slot felt like I was delivering a piece of the world, a piece of truth. I believed, with the unshakable faith of a teenager, that the printed word was where ideas became real, permanent, indisputable. It wasn't just a job. It was an apprenticeship in the thing I came to worship, the authority of print. That love affair carried me through a cheap state college and into the mailroom of a major New York publishing house. From the mailroom to copy editor, from copy editor to a junior editorial position. I was hungry. I outworked everyone. I didn't take vacations. My colleagues went out for drinks. I stayed late, studying layouts, analyzing ad placements, and deconstructing the articles of the great journalists. I wasn't just learning the business, I was inhaling it. By the time I was 28, I was a senior editor at a respectable but deeply boring trade magazine, and I was suffocating. This was the mid-1980s. The world was crackling with a new energy. Wall Street was roaring, ambition was the new religion, and a new class of young professionals was making money faster than their parents could have ever dreamed. They were buying Porsches, wearing Rolexes, and they were desperate for a guide. The old guard publications like the Wall Street Journal were too dry, too academic. The flashier magazines were all about celebrity gossip. I saw a gap, a chasm. I imagined a magazine that was as sleek and aspirational as the lives these people wanted to live, but with the substance and intelligence they needed to get there. It would be about finance, yes, but also about the lifestyle that finance afforded. It would be called Portfolio. When I pitched the idea to my bosses, they laughed right in my face. "The market is saturated, Arthur," my editor-in-chief told me, patting my shoulder condescendingly. "Stick to what you know." That was all I needed to hear. That night I went home, sat down with my wife, Eleanor, and told her I was quitting my job. I told her I was going to cash out our savings, take out a second mortgage on our tiny house, and start my own magazine. She looked at me, her eyes wide with what I thought was fear but was actually something else. It was belief. "Then you better make it the best damn magazine anyone has ever seen," she said. Those first 2 years were a special kind of hell. Our office was a glorified closet in a rundown building that always smelled of boiled cabbage. I was the CEO, the editor, the lead writer, the ad salesman, and the janitor. I wrote articles on a second-hand electric typewriter and designed layouts by physically cutting and pasting images onto cardboard. I cold-called hundreds of potential advertisers a day, facing a near-constant stream of rejection. A new magazine? In this climate? Good luck, kid. More than once I had to choose between paying the printer and paying our mortgage. I ate cold pizza over the light table, where I reviewed proofs and sometimes slept on a pile of old newspapers in the corner, the familiar smell of ink my only comfort. I was running on nothing but coffee, adrenaline, and a terrifying, bone-deep certainty that I was right. That hunger, that absolute conviction that I was on the right path, was the fuel that kept the engine from sputtering out. And before I tell you how that little magazine, born from debt and desperation, became a global empire, if you're new here, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. And I'd love to know where my story is reaching, so let me know in the comments what city or country you're watching from. It's always humbling to see how far a story can travel. The turning point came from a company that sold luxury pens. They were a small, family-owned business, but their products were exquisite. No one else would give me the time of day, but the old man who ran the company, Mr. Abernathy, saw something in the mock-up I showed him. He saw the quality of the paper, the elegance of the font, the intelligence of the writing. "Young man," he said, peering at me over his spectacles, "you believe in quality. So do I." He bought a full-page ad in the first issue. That single ad gave me the legitimacy I needed. It was the first crack in the dam. After that, a watchmaker signed on. Then a high-end automaker. The day the first issue of Portfolio magazine hit the newsstands, I didn't sleep. I walked around the city all night, watching people. I saw a young man in a suit buy a copy. He sat on a bench and started to read, completely engrossed. He didn't just skim it, he consumed it. In that moment, I knew I had won. The magazine didn't just succeed, it exploded. It became the Bible for the new generation of wealth. We weren't just reporting on the culture, we were shaping it. Within 3 years, we were the most profitable magazine per page in the country. The money started pouring in, and it was intoxicating. I remember the day my accountant called to tell me my personal net worth had officially crossed the $1 million mark. I hung up the phone, and I didn't feel joy. I felt validated. I felt like the world had finally caught up to what I knew all along, that I was right. With the profits from Portfolio, I went on an acquisition spree. I launched Elysian, a travel magazine that sold the dream of billion-dollar yachts and private islands. Then came Canvas, a publication for the art world that could make or break an artist's career with a single review. These magazines became the pillars of my new company, the Vance Media Group. We moved out of the closet and into a gleaming skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. I had a corner office with a view that stretched from the Hudson to the East River. I looked down at the city, at the millions of people scurrying below, and I didn't feel like a part of it anymore. I felt like I was above it. I had built my own world, a world of glossy paper, beautiful photographs, and powerful words. A world I controlled completely. From that height, you feel invincible. And that, my friends, is the most dangerous feeling a man can have. From that high up, you can't see the cracks forming in the foundation below. And my foundation, it was made of paper. The 1990s were more than a decade. They were my personal kingdom. The Vance Media Group wasn't just a company. It was an institution, a cultural titan, and I was its undisputed sovereign. My office on the 50th floor was less a workspace and more a temple dedicated to my own success. The desk wasn't just wood. It was a vast polished slab of mahogany imported from Brazil, so large it felt like a continent of its own. The walls weren't painted. They were paneled with dark cherry wood and lined with first-edition books from authors I admired. Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Woolf, men who understood the weight and power of the written word. The air itself was different up there, thick with the scent of expensive leather, old paper, and the faint, sweet aroma of the Cuban cigars I smoked to celebrate victories, which back then felt like a daily occurrence. My power wasn't just financial, that was simply the crude byproduct. My true currency was influence. A positive review in Elysian could turn a boutique hotel in Tuscany into the most sought-after destination on the planet. A feature in Canvas could add a zero to the price of a young painter's work overnight. A critical editorial in Portfolio, penned by me under a pseudonym, could cause a promising stock to tumble. I hosted dinners where senators would ask my opinion on policy, and I threw Christmas parties where CEOs would network not for business, but for the sheer prestige of being on my guest list. I wasn't just reporting on the world of the elite, I was its gatekeeper. I decided who was in and who was out. I had become a tastemaker for an entire generation, and I wielded that power not with a sense of responsibility, but with the casual, unquestioning authority of a king. I believed I was providing a service, defending the very notion of quality in a world that was sliding toward mediocrity. I was the bulwark against the cheap, the easy, and the common. It was into this self-contained universe of curated perfection that the first whispers of the internet arrived. I remember how we talked about it in the boardroom. It was a novelty, a curiosity, We spoke of it the way one might speak of a strange new fad from California, like pet rocks or rollerblading. It was a chaotic, blinking, noisy mess. I saw it as a digital flea market, a place filled with anonymous shouting, bad grammar, and flashing advertisements for things no person of substance would ever desire. It was the antithesis of everything I had built. My magazines were elegant, finite, and tangible. They were experiences. The internet was a disorganized, infinite, and ephemeral cacophony. It was, in a word, vulgar, and I wanted nothing to do with it. That was my mindset in the fall of 1997, the day the first real crack appeared in my fortress. It came in the form of a young man named David Chen. David was, without question, the brightest mind in my company. He was in his late 20s, a Wharton graduate with a mind that moved at the speed of light. He'd started in our analytics department and had risen faster than anyone I'd ever seen. He understood our readers, our advertisers, and our market in a way that was almost unnerving. I saw him as a potential successor, a protégé I could mold in my own image. That was my first miscalculation. David had no intention of being a copy of me. He requested a special presentation to the executive board. He was nervous, I could see it, but his eyes burned with the fire of a true believer. He set up his projector, a clunky machine in our stately mahogany-paneled boardroom, and began his pitch. He called it Vance 2.0. The proposal was radical. He suggested we create digital versions of all our magazines. Not just copies, he explained, but new entities entirely. He talked about creating websites with articles, but also with forums where our readers could discuss financial strategies. He talked about hyperlinks that could take a reader from a review of a car in Portfolio directly to the manufacturer's page. He talked about selling subscriptions online, reaching a global audience instantaneously, creating a new revenue stream from something called banner ads. He spoke of engagement and community, words that sounded utterly foreign and irrelevant to me. I listened with a polite, fixed smile, but inside I was appalled. He was taking my masterpieces, my carefully constructed works of art, and suggesting we chop them up and scatter the pieces into this digital void. The other board members, all men in their 50s and 60s who owed their careers to me, shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs, looking to me for their cue. When he finished, the room was silent. David looked at me, his face flush with passion and hope. "Mr. Vance," he said, "this is the future. We can be the first. We can define what luxury and quality mean in this new space." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer, savoring my power. Then I stood up and walked to the head of the table. "David," I began, my voice calm and paternal, the tone I used when I was about to crush someone. "I appreciate the enthusiasm, but you are fundamentally misunderstanding what we sell here. We do not sell information. Information is cheap. It's a commodity. Anyone can provide it." I gestured to the pristine copy of Portfolio sitting in front of me. "We sell an experience. We sell authority. We sell the physical sensation of turning a heavy, glossy page. We sell the beauty of a perfectly framed photograph printed with the finest German inks. We sell the quiet, contemplative half-hour a man spends with our magazine and a glass of scotch on a Friday evening. We sell a dream." I looked him directly in the eye. "You are asking me to trade a tailored Savile Row suit for a cheap, off-the-rack polyester one. You are asking me to trade a Rembrandt for a child's crayon drawing. People do not pay a premium for pixels, David. They pay for paper. They pay for permanence. This internet is a fleeting distraction. It's a playground for amateurs in their basements. We are professionals. We are the gold standard. We will not dilute our brand by wallowing in the digital mud with everyone else." I had publicly, systematically, and eloquently dismantled his vision. I had humiliated him. I saw the light go out of his eyes. The other board members nodded in solemn agreement, some murmuring, "Well said, Arthur." The meeting was over. David packed up his projector in silence and left the room. 6 months later, his letter of resignation was on my desk. He wrote that he was leaving to start his own online-only publication. When I saw him in the hallway to say goodbye, I shook his hand with a magnanimous, pitying smile. "Best of luck with your little project, David," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. "Don't be a stranger when you realize the real world is still made of paper and ink." He just looked at me, a flicker of something, sadness perhaps, or resolve in his eyes, and said, "Goodbye, Arthur." I watched him walk away, feeling a smug sense of satisfaction. I had defended my principles. I had protected the integrity of my empire. I genuinely believed I had just dodged a bullet. In my grand, unassailable arrogance, I had no idea of the truth. I hadn't just dismissed a junior employee. I had looked the future directly in the face, laughed at it, and then politely showed it the door. I thought I was closing a chapter on a foolish idea. In reality, I had just handed my executioner the blueprint for the scaffold. The dawn of the new millennium felt to me like a personal coronation. The world had survived the Y2K panic, and the Vance Media Group was stronger than ever, or so I told myself. We were a monolith, a fixture in the cultural landscape, and I operated under the blissful and deeply flawed assumption that our position was unassailable. The dismissal of David Chen and his digital fantasies became a celebrated anecdote in my inner circle, a testament to my unwavering commitment to quality. But beneath the placid surface of our success, the tectonic plates of the world were shifting, and the tremors were beginning to be felt even in my ivory tower. I just chose not to feel them. The first signs were subtle, easily dismissed as statistical noise, a slight dip in newsstand sales for portfolio, a fractional decrease in the renewal rate for Elysian subscriptions. My chief financial officer, a meticulous and perpetually worried man named George, would present these figures in our quarterly meetings, his brow furrowed with concern. "Arthur, advertising revenue from our mid-tier clients is down 4% this quarter," he'd say, pointing to a line on a graph. "They're citing budget reallocations to online initiatives." I would wave a dismissive hand. "It's a market correction, George, a temporary belt-tightening. Our premium advertisers, the ones that matter, they understand our value. Quality is recession-proof." I genuinely believed it. In my mind, the world was divided into two camps: the fleeting, chaotic world of the internet and the permanent, curated world of Vance Media. I saw them not as competitors, but as entirely separate ecosystems. I was so insulated by my own success, so cocooned in the echo chamber of my hand-picked executives, that I mistook stagnation for stability. I told my board, my staff, and myself that we were a luxury brand, like Rolls-Royce or Patek Philippe. We didn't chase trends, we set the standard. It was a beautiful, comforting, and utterly catastrophic delusion. To prove my point, to myself as much as to the whispering doubters, I decided to make the grandest statement imaginable about the power and permanence of print. I conceived of a project that would be my legacy, the Vance Media Printing and Distribution Center. This wouldn't be just a printing press, it would be a cathedral dedicated to ink and paper. I found a massive plot of land in New Jersey, overlooking the Manhattan skyline, and I poured my soul and a staggering amount of the company's capital into it. I hired a world-renowned architect to design a building of glass and steel that looked more like a modern art museum than a factory. Inside, we installed the most advanced German printing presses in the world, machines the size of locomotives, capable of reproducing photographs with a clarity and depth that no computer screen could ever hope to match. The project was a financial black hole. The cost ballooned to over $150 million. To finance it, I leveraged the company to the hilt, taking on massive loans from a consortium of banks who were all too happy to lend money to the great Arthur Vance. My CFO, George, pleaded with me. "Arthur, this is a monumental risk. We're betting the entire company on an industry that's showing signs of contraction. The debt service alone will be crippling." I looked at him with pity. "George," I said, my voice dripping with the condescension I reserved for lesser minds, "you see debt. I see an investment in the future. This facility isn't a factory, it's a fortress." It's a statement that while the rest of the world is playing with flickering lights on a screen, we are in the business of creating tangible, beautiful, real things. This will secure our dominance for the next 50 years. It was around this time that the conflict moved from the boardroom to my own home. My daughter Sarah had just graduated from Columbia with a degree in journalism. She was brilliant, sharp, and possessed a rebellious streak that I once admired but now found increasingly irritating. She saw the world not as I did, through the lens of established tradition, but as a fluid, ever-changing landscape of new possibilities. She had grown up with the internet. It was as natural to her as breathing. She didn't share my reverence for the printed page. To her, a story was a story, whether it was on glossy paper or a glowing screen. She joined Vance Media as a junior editor at Elysian, a position I granted her with a mix of fatherly pride and patriarchal caution. I hoped the institution's gravitas would temper her more radical ideas. Instead, it fueled them. She saw the slow decay from the inside and was horrified. One evening, she came to my home office, her laptop in hand, her face alight with the same fervent passion I had once seen in David Chen's. "Dad, look at this," she said, showing me a website she had built. It was a blog for Elysian. It was simple, elegant, and featured behind-the-scenes content from our photo shoots, interviews with travel writers, and short, punchy articles about hidden gems in popular cities. "I built it myself over a few weekends," she explained, her words tumbling out in a rush. "It's getting incredible traffic, thousands of unique visitors a day, just from word of mouth. People are posting comments, sharing the articles. They're creating a community around the brand. We could sell digital advertising, create premium content. The possibilities are endless." I looked at the screen, at the slightly pixelated images and the messy string of reader comments below an article, and I felt a surge of something hot and acidic in my chest. It was a feeling of betrayal. She was taking the pristine, untouchable brand I had painstakingly built and turning it into a common public square. She was cheapening it, giving away our carefully crafted content for free. "Who authorized this?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "No one," she said, her enthusiasm faltering slightly. "I just did it. I wanted to show you what was possible." "Possible?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "You're showing me the vulgarization of the Vance brand. We are in the business of aspiration, Sarah. We sell exclusivity. You're turning it into a roadside diner, giving away free coffee to attract riffraff. This is not what we do. We are not in the business of chasing clicks." The argument that followed was one of the worst of my life. I was dismissive and cruel. She was defiant and I now realized tragically correct. I saw her passion as a personal attack on my life's work. She saw my refusal to listen as an act of suicidal stubbornness. The fight culminated with me standing over her, my finger jabbing at the laptop screen. "You will take this down, immediately," I commanded. "You work for me, and you will respect the principles upon which this company was built." Sarah looked at me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. The fiery defiance in them was replaced by a profound, wounding disappointment. "You don't get it, Dad," she whispered, her voice cracking. "You're not selling dreams anymore. You're selling nostalgia. You're building a beautiful museum for an art form that people are ceasing to visit. And the future doesn't care how beautiful your museum is." She closed the laptop and walked out of the room without another word. I stood there, my heart pounding with rage and a sliver of something I refused to acknowledge as fear. I told myself I had done the right thing, that I had protected the brand from a naive, youthful impulse. But as the adrenaline faded, a cold certainty settled over me. That night, I hadn't just lost a business opportunity. I had begun the slow, painful process of losing my own daughter, and I was too blind, too proud, and too damn stubborn to even see it. My confrontation with Sarah marked a turning point, a moment where my denial hardened into a militant ideology. My office, once a place of vibrant debate and strategic planning, transformed into something more akin to a royal court, where the only opinions permitted were echoes of my own. I began to subconsciously, then deliberately purge my inner circle of anyone who challenged the prevailing dogma. Executives who used words like digital integration, online presence, or new media paradigms found themselves marginalized, their projects defunded, their voices muted in board meetings. They were either reassigned to meaningless tasks in corporate Siberia, or they simply read the writing on the wall and quietly resigned. In their place, I promoted men of my own generation. Loyalists, courtiers, men who saw my vision not as a business strategy, but as a sacred creed. Our boardroom became a chamber of mirrors, each one reflecting my own handsome, aging, and utterly misguided face back at me. We were no longer a company, we were a cult, and I was its infallible prophet. We doubled down on our commitment to print with a fervor that bordered on the fanatical. I funneled millions into extravagant advertising campaigns that celebrated the sensory experience of reading our magazines. We commissioned commercials shot by famous film directors, featuring beautiful people in luxurious settings, caressing the pages of Portfolio or Elysian as if they were holy relics. The tagline was "Feel the Story." It was a masterpiece of marketing, aesthetically stunning and strategically bankrupt. We were spending a fortune to convince people to love something they were naturally, quietly and inexorably falling out of love with. We were trying to sell romantic horse-drawn carriages to a world that was joyfully embracing the automobile. The world outside our insulated walls was moving on, and the first truly devastating blow came not from a competitor, but from a partner. For 2 decades, our most prestigious and loyal advertiser had been a legendary Swiss watchmaker, a brand synonymous with timeless elegance and precision. Their full-page advertisements on the back cover of Portfolio were iconic, a cornerstone of our revenue and our reputation. One Tuesday morning, George, my perpetually anxious CFO, came into my office looking paler than usual. He closed the door behind him and handed me a letter, his hand trembling slightly. It was from the watchmaker's CEO. The letter was polite, filled with corporate jargon about synergies and evolving marketing landscapes, but the message was a dagger to the heart. They were reallocating 70% of their global advertising budget to online platforms for the next fiscal year. 70%. It was an unthinkable betrayal. I refused to accept it. This wasn't a business decision. It was an insult, a personal affront. I told my secretary to get their CEO on the phone immediately. When he answered, I didn't bother with pleasantries. I flew into a rage, my voice echoing through the office. I accused him of short-sightedness, of abandoning a 30-year partnership, of chasing cheap clicks at the expense of true prestige. He listened patiently, then replied in a calm, measured voice that only infuriated me more. "Arthur," he said, "it is not a matter of prestige. It is a matter of mathematics. For what we pay you for one back cover, I can reach 20 times the number of targeted potential customers online. I can track their engagement. I can see who clicks, who buys. With you, I get a beautiful picture. The world has changed." I wouldn't hear it. In a moment of supreme world-ending hubris, I issued an ultimatum. "It's 100% with Vance Media, or it's nothing," I snarled. "You cannot have the prestige of our pages as a part-time lover. You are either with us, or you are against us." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I expected him to capitulate, to recognize the gravity of losing our endorsement. Instead, he said, with a tone of genuine regret, "I am sorry to hear that, Arthur. I wish you the best." And then he was gone. I had called his bluff, only to discover he wasn't bluffing. He had chosen nothing. The loss of that single contract ripped a $30 million hole in our annual revenue. It was a wound that could not be hidden. Panic began to ripple through the company. Instead of retreating, reassessing, and adapting, I did the only thing a cornered emperor knows how to do. I became more aggressive. My logic became warped by desperation. I convinced myself that the problem wasn't that the print industry was shrinking, but that it was too fragmented. My solution? Consolidation. I would become the king of a dying empire. I embarked on a reckless acquisition spree, using our dwindling credit lines to buy up smaller, struggling publishing houses. I bought a venerable but nearly bankrupt literary journal, a collection of niche hobbyist magazines, and even a rival business publication that had been our competitor for years. On paper, it looked like the Vance Media Group was expanding, growing more powerful. My press releases spoke of strategic acquisitions and market consolidation. But the reality was grotesque. I was like a man on a sinking ship, trying to save himself by frantically pulling the drowning passengers from other sinking ships aboard his own. Each acquisition brought more debt, more antiquated printing presses, more bloated payrolls, more subscribers who were fleeing to the internet. I was buying up the past, collecting relics. My board, now entirely composed of my sycophants, applauded every move. "Brilliant, Arthur," they'd chime in unison. "A masterstroke, cornering the market." Sarah tried to intervene one last time. She came to me with a meticulously researched proposal showing how we could have acquired a dozen promising online startups for a fraction of the cost of one failing magazine. "Dad, please," she begged. "You're buying ink, paper, and warehouses. The real value is in audiences, data, and platforms. You're buying the hardware of a dying industry when you should be investing in the software of the new one." I dismissed her out of hand. I saw her proposal as an extension of her previous betrayal, a further attempt to dismantle my legacy. Our conversation was short and brutal. It ended with me telling her that if she couldn't support the company's vision, perhaps she didn't belong in the company at all. She resigned the next day. The silence she left behind in my life was deafening. The final act of my folly was the celebration after the acquisition of our largest rival. I gathered my board at a lavish steakhouse, the kind of place with dark wood leather banquettes and waiters who called you sir. We ordered the most expensive bottles of Bordeaux and toasted our success. I stood up and made a speech, my words slurring slightly from the wine and my own self-importance. I spoke of our glorious future as the undisputed champion of the printed word. "Let the children have their flashing screens," I declared, raising my glass. "We are the guardians of substance. We are the keepers of the flame." As my board members roared their approval, I felt a triumphant surge of vindication. I felt like a general on the eve of a great battle, confident in the strength of my legions. I had amassed the largest, most powerful army of paper and ink the world had ever seen. I truly believed I was invincible, but I had made a fatal, anachronistic error. I failed to realize that the nature of war had fundamentally changed. I had built the world's most magnificent cavalry, just as the first tanks were rolling off the assembly line. That celebratory toast wasn't a prelude to victory. It was the last drink on the Titanic. It was the final resonant nail being hammered into the lid of my own exquisitely crafted coffin. And then, just as I stood at the peak of my paper mountain, convinced of its permanence, the ground beneath me didn't just tremble, it liquefied. The whole world changed, seemingly overnight. And what comes next? This is the part of my story where the bravado evaporates and the raw, agonizing truth remains. Before I walk you through the anatomy of my collapse, how every single brick of my empire was torn down, I need to ask you something. If you've been on this journey with me so far and haven't yet, please take a second to click that subscribe button. It means more than you know. And I'm genuinely curious for your perspective. Comment below and tell me what you believe was my single greatest mistake up to this point. Was it my arrogance in dismissing David? My reckless investment in the printing press? Or was it shutting out my own daughter? I'd really like to know what you think. The catalyst for my ruin had a name, the global financial crisis of 2008. To the world, it was a maelstrom of subprime mortgages, credit default swaps, and collapsing banks. To me, it was the perfect storm. A hurricane that hit my structurally flawed fortress with biblical force. The economic world I understood, the one that had made me a king, simply ceased to exist. The first thing to vanish was credit. The spigot of easy money that had fueled my reckless acquisitions was turned off with a violent final twist. The banks that had once courted me with lavish lunches were now cold, impersonal entities demanding immediate repayment on loans I had no way of servicing. The second thing to disappear, and this was the mortal wound, was advertising. It didn't just decline, it evaporated. In a panic, corporations didn't trim their marketing budgets, they amputated them, and the precious few dollars that remained were funneled with desperate precision into the only place that offered measurable results and a low cost of entry: the Internet. The online advertising David Chen had pitched to me a decade earlier was no longer a novelty. It was the only lifeboat in a sea of red ink. My beautiful, expensive, full-page print ads were a luxury no one could afford, an indulgence from a bygone era. My sales team, once a pack of alpha predators who could close deals on charm and a firm handshake, were now making desperate calls to disconnected numbers and sending emails that were never returned. The dominoes began to fall, not one by one, but in whole sections. The colossal debt I had taken on to build my cathedral to print became a ravenous monster, devouring what little cash flow we had left. The interest payments alone were astronomical. Then came the returns. Every morning, trucks would arrive at our distribution centers, not to pick up new issues, but to unload mountains of unsold magazines. The newsstands were sending them back by the pallet load. I remember standing in one of the warehouses, a vast, cavernous space, surrounded by towering stacks of my own glossy failures. The cover of that month's portfolio featured a confident-looking CEO with the headline, "Thriving in Uncertainty." The irony was so profound, it was physically nauseating. Those magazines, each one a product of immense effort and expense, were now just expensive garbage. The smell of ink that I had loved my entire life now smelled like decay, like the cloying scent of flowers at a funeral. The phone calls started. First, they were polite inquiries from our suppliers, the paper mills, the ink manufacturers. Then the calls became more insistent. Finally, they were furious demands from collection agencies. My world shrank to the size of my mahogany desk, which was now buried under a blizzard of past-due notices, legal threats, and default warnings. The pressure was immense, a physical weight that settled on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Sleep became a stranger. I'd lie awake at night staring into the darkness, my mind racing, replaying every mistake, every arrogant pronouncement, every ignored warning. The silence of my mansion was filled with the phantom ringing of telephones and the accusing whispers of the people I had failed. The dismantling of my life's work was a brutal, systematic process of humiliation. First came the layoffs. I had to let go of thousands of people. I'll never forget the day I had to fire my executive assistant, a woman who had been with me for 35 years, who knew my coffee order better than my own wife had, who had sent flowers to my daughter on every birthday. I called her into my office, the same office where we had celebrated so many triumphs, and I told her that her position was being eliminated. The look in her eyes wasn't anger. It was a deep, shattering sense of betrayal. It was the look of someone whose loyalty had been repaid with abandonment. I saw that same look over and over in the faces of editors, writers, and press operators, men and women who had dedicated their lives to the Vance Media Group. I had promised them a legacy, and I had delivered them a pink slip. To satisfy the creditors, we had to sell everything. The Cathedral, my magnificent printing press in New Jersey, was sold for scrap metal and real estate value to a logistics company that planned to turn it into a warehouse for cheap consumer goods. It went for less than 10 cents on the dollar. The corporate jets were next, then the fleet of company cars, then the art from our office walls. Piece by piece, the empire was liquidated. The final, gut-wrenching step was selling the magazines themselves, or rather, what was left of them. The physical assets were worthless. The only thing of value were the brand names, the mastheads, and the tiny digital footprints Sarah had once tried to build. A bankruptcy auction was held. It wasn't in a grand hall, but in a sterile, impersonal lawyer's office. I wasn't allowed to attend, but George was there. He called me afterward, his voice hollow. The entire portfolio of Vance Media Group titles, Portfolio, Elysian, Canvas, everything, had been sold as a single lot. The winning bidder, he told me, was a new, aggressive, and incredibly profitable digital media conglomerate called Next Gen Media. And then he delivered the killing blow. "Arthur," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "you need to know who the founder and CEO of Next Gen Media is." I didn't need him to say the name. In that moment, the universe achieved a kind of perfect, cruel symmetry. It was David Chen, the young man I had humiliated and dismissed a decade earlier, the one who had seen the future while I was busy worshipping the past. He hadn't just built a lifeboat, he had built an armada. And now, he had sailed back to purchase the wreckage of my sunken luxury liner for a pittance. The final scene of my professional life was the day I had to walk out of my 50th floor office for the last time. The movers had already taken everything. The vast mahogany desk was gone. The leather chairs, the first edition books, all sold. The only thing that remained was a faint, rectangular outline on the cherry wood paneling where the gleaming bronze logo of the Vance Media Group had once been proudly displayed. I stood there for a long time, staring at that empty space on the wall, a ghost of a ghost. I had lost $200 million. I had lost my company. I had lost my reputation. I was 60 years old, and for the first time since I was a 16-year-old paperboy, I had absolutely nothing. I was at the bottom of a hole so deep I couldn't even see the sky. The year after the bankruptcy was not a year of rebuilding. It was a year of silence. The thunderous collapse of my empire was followed by an unnerving, deafening quiet. The phones, which had once rung off the hook with calls from the most powerful people in the world, went completely silent. The flood of invitations to galas, fundraisers, and exclusive events dried up instantly. The friends who had once slapped me on the back and laughed at my jokes suddenly couldn't recall my name. I learned the swiftest and most brutal lesson about the nature of transactional relationships. When you have nothing left to transact, the relationship ceases to exist. I was no longer Arthur Vance, the media magnate. I was just Arthur, a man whose past was more impressive than his present, which made me, in the eyes of the world I had once ruled, utterly irrelevant. My identity had been so completely fused with my company that its dissolution felt like a personal disintegration. For 40 years, I had woken up every morning with a purpose: to build, to conquer, to win. Now, I woke up in a small rented apartment with peeling paint and a view of a brick wall, and the only thing on my agenda was the vast, terrifying expanse of an empty day. The shame was a physical presence, a heavy cloak I couldn't take off. I avoided going outside during the day, terrified of running into someone from my former life, of seeing the pity, or worse, the smug satisfaction in their eyes. I became a ghost in my own city, haunting the late-night diners and early-morning parks, a relic of a forgotten age. My world, once a sprawling global map of influence and power, had shrunk to the four walls of that drab apartment. I wasn't just broke, I was broken. I had lost the game, and in doing so, I felt I had lost myself. It was during my lowest point, on a bleak Tuesday afternoon, when the thought of simply not waking up the next morning felt like a seductive comfort, that I heard a soft knock on my door. I ignored it. It came again, more persistent this time. Annoyed, I shuffled to the door and opened it a crack, ready to dismiss whoever it was. Standing in the dim hallway was my daughter, Sarah. She wasn't holding a checkbook or a bag of groceries. She was just holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't offer pity or advice. She just looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in years, and said, "There's a bench down the street that gets some sun." I thought we could sit for a while. We sat on that park bench for hours, mostly in silence, sipping our coffee as the city bustled around us. It was in that quiet space, stripped of the pretense of boardrooms and the weight of legacy, that we began to find our way back to each other. She didn't want to talk about the bankruptcy or the mistakes I had made. She wanted to talk about the things we had lost long before the money disappeared, the family dinners we used to have, the funny stories about her grandfather, the time I taught her how to ride a bicycle. She was gently reminding me that there was an Arthur who existed long before the Vance of Vance Media Group. It was the beginning of a slow, painful, but ultimately beautiful excavation, digging through the rubble of my ego to find the man buried beneath. Over the following months, through countless coffees and long walks, Sarah helped me arrive at the fundamental, humbling truth. My greatest failure wasn't ignoring the internet. That was merely the symptom, the tactical blunder born from a much deeper, more profound strategic error. My true fatal mistake was that I had fallen in love with the container, and I had forgotten the value of what it contained. I worshipped the glossy paper, the German inks, the heavy binding, the imposing buildings. I had become so obsessed with the vessel, the medium, that I had lost sight of the mission: to tell stories, to connect people with ideas, to create meaning. The internet didn't destroy my business. My inflexibility did. My ego did. My refusal to listen, to learn, and to evolve was the poison that I had willingly drunk every single day. I had built a magnificent temple to the printed word, and then I sealed the doors and refused to acknowledge that the world had found a new way to pray. This is my life now. It's quiet, it's simple. 3 days a week I volunteer here, at this public library, the very place where a young boy with ink-stained fingers might first fall in love with the power of a story. I help kids with their reading. I reshelve books. I breathe in that familiar, comforting scent of old paper and endless possibility. It's not a fall from grace. In a strange way, it's a return to the source. The money is gone. The fame is a distant echo. The power is a memory. But what I have now is a different kind of wealth. I have a relationship with my daughter that is built on honesty and forgiveness, not on obligation and expectation. I have peace of mind, a freedom from the crushing weight of having to be Arthur Vance. I have the simple, profound joy of watching a child's eyes light up when they discover the magic within a book. I lost a $200 million empire, but I found my daughter. And more importantly, I finally found myself. Looking back, I would make that trade again in a heartbeat. The ultimate lesson is this: money is an amplifier. It doesn't make you good or bad, it just makes you more of what you already are. If you are insecure, it will make you arrogant. If you are generous, it will make you a philanthropist. If you are afraid, it will make you paranoid. My wealth amplified my pride into a terminal case of hubris. The real measure of your life isn't the height of the empire you build, but the strength of the bridges you refuse to burn. Don't become so attached to the tools of your trade that you forget the purpose of your craft. The tools will always change. The purpose, connection, creation, service, that is eternal. If this story has resonated with you in any way, please share this video with someone who you think might need to hear this message. And for my final request, I want to leave the last word to you. Comment below and tell me, what is the single greatest lesson that money, or the lack of it, has ever taught you in your life? Thank you truly for listening.